Hi, this is Dave, and this is a tutorial on inspecting an oil and gas production data set from Natrona County, Wyoming. When we look at Excel worksheets, they're always organized into columns and rows, where the columns are labeled alphabetically and the rows are labeled numerically. Every cell has a cell address based on their column and row identifier. So for example, here I clicked on B, and you notice that it's highlighted here, and 7 also highlighted, and you see the address in the name box. If I wanted to navigate to A1, I could type A1 here. I've already put in a custom name there for top. So you can click in any cell and type in here in the name box a custom name. This can sometimes be very useful with large data sets for navigating around. Now, let's say I've already labeled the bottom as bottom, so I could get down there very quickly. So that's a very quick way to go up and down to navigate. Let's go back up to the top, and let's take a quick look at the data set. We usually do a visual inspection. I'm looking for blank cells. As you can see, oil gravity have blank cells in them. Some of them may be populated. We'll investigate that a little bit more later on in the tutorial. But you can scroll down and just look for numbers that might be very long, or there might be error messages in the cells. And here we can see that there's some oil gravity values in there. So we can do that. In this data set, there's some things here I'm not too interested in looking at. So just to make things a little easier to look at, we don't really want to look at the lat or the long or the year, the production year. So I highlight them. I can right click. Now you can do this on columns and rows by right clicking, where you can insert, delete. Here I'm going to hide these just to make this, and we're going to do the same thing with production days and water total. And right click and we'll hide it. Now you'll notice that there's a little gap there here in the column headers. At any point you can unhide just by highlighting across them, right clicking, and hit unhide. We don't need to do that right now. So so basically in review, you can insert, you can delete columns or rows, or you can hide and unhide these columns. Another handy thing for working in these large data sets is the ability to either the freeze panes or to split the screen. So for example, if I click here in A2 and let's go to view, for there it says freeze panes, and you can freeze panes in different ways. You can do it if you can freeze a pane from a column and a row. Here we're just going to do the row. Now when I scroll down, you always see the header, and that's really nice, a nice feature for going through large databases. And to unfreeze it, you can just go unfreeze panes, and you're done. Now let's look at split screen. So under view, there is a button here in the ribbon called split, and when I do that, you get this bar, and if you get this right, that little divider symbol, you can scroll up and down, and you can see here I can also do it by columns. And the nice thing about here is you can sort of use it like a freeze pane, but you can go down, you can keep that one here, or I could go to the bottom here. And if you ever wanted to, say, copy and paste a large range of values, you could just click at the bottom and through the top, and you could do a Control-C and a Control-V for copy and paste. So this is a nice feature. To get rid of it, just drag it back to the top, it disappears. And the same thing with the column divider. Just drag it off to one side and you're done with that. So split screens is a very useful tool. We're always selecting cells. So one way to do it is just to click in a cell and you've selected it. If you take that large plus symbol and you go down, you can select a range of cells. And the same thing if you want to select a different range of cells, you could just go through and you could do your sorting or functions or whatever you want to do on the selected range of cells. A common task in Excel worksheets is selecting cells. You can do it by simply clicking on a particular cell and it's selected. It shows it as being grayed out. You can see A and the 2 are grayed. So that cell is currently selected. If I select a range of cells, you'll notice that the cells are grayed out except for where you initiated the selection. But that cell is also selected. You can select the entire worksheet by clicking up here at this upper left corner of the row and column identifiers. But this will select everything, no matter how far you go out over what range, which is sometimes useful, but not always. You can simply select a column by clicking on the column header, or the same with the row. If I wanted to select a range of columns, I could just drag across the columns. Well, let's say I didn't want the company name, but I wanted to select everything else. If I use the Control button and click on the column header, I can unselect that. Same thing, if I wanted to select different cells, I could highlight them, skip a few, hold the Control and mouse button on the left mouse button, and you can select a different range. So that's some of the things you can do. Another way to select, if I want to just select just the data itself, I could click in the upper left corner, use Control, Shift, add arrow keys, and you go over and down. And this will select the entire data set. You can also use that just to quickly navigate if I just wanted to go to the top of the data set. So the Control, Shift, arrow keys are very useful. Let's say here I go to oil gravity and go Control, Shift, and it goes to the first record. And if I hit again Control, Shift, it'll go to the next record. And you can see it stops. So if you have blank cells in your database, that can be an issue when you're doing this. But when I do the entire database, because some of these columns are entirely populated, it will go all the way to the bottom. Another way to navigate is you can navigate using the elevator bar or the scroll button or scroll wheel. So that's one way. These are ways that you can navigate through a data set. There are a lot of repetitive tasks that we do in Excel. For example, if we need to find a value or replace values. And there are many tools on the ribbons that allow us to do this. For example, for find and replace or select, you can use this tool on the home menu. When I was navigating through this database before, I noticed that a number of the field names for Salt Creek were misspelled as Salt Creeks. So I want to find and replace these. So using shortcuts, which are basically a combination of keystrokes, you can quickly find these. There are 4 of them that I use a lot. One of them is find. So in this case here, I'll select the column, and Control plus F will bring up the dialog box for find. You can also see there's also a little replace. You can also go right to replace here too. And in this case here, I could have done that with a Control H and got up this box. So I find here that I have Salt Creek and Salt Creek, and I want to replace. I could just hit Replace All, but there might be some in there I'm not aware of. So let me just do a Find All really quick, and you'll see that it shows that there are basically 3 cells found. So I can just hit Replace All, and it will replace those 3 cells. The other thing you can do is just do a Find Next and hit Replace. Find, it already found the next one. You could replace, and you found the next one, and you can replace. So that's a pretty slick tool. And just to kind of show you here, if I went here and I did Control H, it would bring up the dialog box for that replace, and you could flip back to find. Another common task is just the undo. I didn't really want to replace that. You could just go here and use the replace undo, and I could replace those or undo those. And the other way is I could use the redo and go back. Another very useful shortcut in Excel is to format cells. Use the shortcut Control+1, and in this case we're going to select OEBs, Control+1, and it brings up the dialog box. And notice you could change things. If I wanted to change it to currency, and it shows you the examples of what you can do. I could change it to a date, a time, a fraction. So you have all these choices, and you could also, so those are numbers, but you can also do alignments. So a lot of times for text cells, if you want to wrap text, shrink to fit, or merge cells, you can do some formatting for your font style, borders, fill, and protection. Let's go to number here, and let's say that I want this to be a number, my OEBs, and I want it out to 1 decimal place, and I want commas as a delimiter. Click OK, and it changes it. Let's say I wanted to go back. I'll just hit Control Z. And so this is a very useful shortcut. Let's talk about relative and absolute cell addresses. By default in Excel, all addresses are relative. So for example, let's go over here into cell address 02, and let's make it equal to our oil equivalent barrels. So it's equal to cell address G2. If I fill down by grabbing the little handle here and dragging it down, it basically changes the cell address each time it increments it. So it's G4, G5, G6, and so on. And if I wanted to go to the right and change the columns, I could fill out to the right. And again, now it's H2, H3, and so on, H4. So that's one way you can use these relative addresses. They're very handy. But let's say I wanted to always keep it the same. I always want every cell to be equal to G2. So let's come over here back to G2. And to make them absolute, we insert the $sign. Now there are 2 ways to do $signs. You can just put them in manually, or, which is real practical, I could just hit the F4 and it does it for you. Accept the change, and notice no matter where I fill down or to the right, it's not cooperating with me here. It's always equal to the cell address of G2. So, as a practical example, let's take a look at this table here where I have these shift depths. I want to shift some depth ranges. And well, first off, we need to convert these over to here so they're not text. I want a top and a base. So I'll highlight these cells, and in the data main menu is text to columns. I'm going to use the dash as a delimiter, and I'm specifying that dash is the delimiter, and it's populated here. Well, let's say here I want to do the new depth. We're going to equal to the depth plus the shift amount. And now I'm going to fill down. And so it just adds at 11. Well, let's say I'm dealing with 1,000 rows of data, and I really don't want to have to keep I don't want to have to change it every time if I'm doing some experimental work. Let's just say that that doesn't exist. So I'll delete those records. And let's say over here in Q13, I'm going to put in here 11. And now I could come in here and I could say equal the depth plus the address. And right now I'm not going to make it absolute, just to kind of as a demonstration. And you'll see it's 60, which is right. And let's drag it down, and you can see that 11 plus it's not right because it's just seeing the blank, and then here if you look at it, it's seeing Q15, which is 1, or no, it's depth range Q15. So that doesn't work. But if I come in here and I change this, and I'll just click on the right side of it and hit F4, it's changed it to an absolute cell address. So now it's 60, and fill it down, and now you can see it's doing it correctly. So there are many cases where this really comes in handy, is using these absolute cell addresses. One of the most useful features in Excel is the status bar, which sits at the very bottom of the page. Now it says it's ready here, but if it were doing calculations, it would say it was calculating. One of the things I always like to add by right-clicking in the status bar, bringing up the dialog box, is I can add the average, the count, numerical count, minimum, maximum, and sum of selected records. So let's say here I wanted to know something about the first 12 columns in my database. It says here that the average is 1491, that 11 records are counted, and the numerical count is 11. If I had selected the header, it would say that the count was 12. The minimum, the maximum, and the sum. So let's go in here and let's just select the entire column. And you'll see now that the count is 2311, but the numerical count is 2311. Let's do the same thing here for gravity, which we know has a lot of blank cells. It tells me the average. It says the count is 1299 and the numerical count is 1298. So we know that there are 1,298 records. It gives you the min, the max, and the sum. So this is something that can be used if you're looking for spurious values. Let's say if I was, let's click on the OEBs again, and my max here is 599,429 barrels. Well, if I saw the max in there as 25 billion, I'd surely want to go and check that. So for just navigating and error checking data, it's very handy to use the status bar. Now let's talk about filters. So if we go over here to the Home main menu, and we'll see here there's a Sort and Filters icon on the ribbon. And let's say I want to do a filter, and I'm just going to click here on the header row and go to Filter. And if I come down in here, it now has these little drop down arrows. And let's say I wanted to get a list of the field names. Well, you can see here there's a list of field names. And if I were error checking my data, just kind of visually inspecting it, I'd look through maybe some typos where things are kind of spelled very similarly, but they may be wrong. So let's go through here, and so here's one here. There's Smoky Gap spelled with an E and Smoky Gap spelled with no E. So I'm just going to change this a little bit and go Select, and now I'm just going to select the Smoky Gaps to see what we're dealing with. So there's Smoky with an E and without. And now I'll just look at the records. These are all the records with just Smoky Gap, and I can see that there's just a couple of them here that I think are issues. So I'm just going to come in here and I'm going to correct that. Get rid of the E, and where's the other Smoky? Is that the only one? Let's just to make sure, let's go back up to the filters. And see if there's any. Nope, there was just the one. So you don't see the one with the E anymore. So before I unselect, I could select all again. Notice that when you use the filters, the highlighted rows that are presenting are now in blue. That tells you that there's a filter on. Also, you'll see there's a little dot up by the little filter symbol. The other thing to also look for is that usually on the bottom will tell you if there are blanks. Another feature in here is that you can also do a search, and there are text filters. So with equals, not equals. So that's another. Those are quick ways that you can search through the filters. And let's just turn everything back on again and so hit select all, and bang, we're there. Let's take a quick look here at oil gravity. Now, let's say that I wanted to copy and paste only the records that have oil gravity. I'm going to come down here. I'm going to turn off the blanks so they don't show. And now I've only have these. I can look at the statistics again and see how many records we have here. And if I wanted to do a copy and paste, I could just copy and paste only those records that are not blank. So the filters can be very useful for doing this kind of work. I wanted to quickly demonstrate a little trick we can do with column identifiers. Let's say you wanted to do an average on OEBs over a certain range of rows. So you could type equal average, and you see it finds it. I'll just double click here, and then it wants the cell addresses. So I'll just put in that range and complete the address, and that gives me the average. But let's say that I wanted to do the whole row, in which case you could either highlight the range like so, click Control Shift, and you could do it that way, and that will get that complete range. Or here's where the trick comes in, is that you could also just put in here G colon G, in which case it's just going to do the entire column. Now, where this comes in handy is when you're editing a database and say you're adding records on and off and you want to keep track. So if you're deleting or adding records to your database, this will change, and you won't have to go back and change the range of cells each time. So it's really practical if you want to do these calculations for a particular row. So you could do sum and G colon G. If I want to do standard deviation, standard dev, it needs an equal sign, so equal st, and let's just do the sample version, and G colon G, and let's get a count, equal COU count, G colon G. So knowing how to do that little trick here with just using the column identifiers is really convenient. One of the most common tasks that you'll do in Excel is to sort your data. This is done by going to the sort icon under the home on the main menu, and you select it, and you can see you can sort which is ascending, going from smallest to largest, or from largest to smallest, or descending. I'm almost always use the custom sort. Now, when you do this, before you sort anything, you have to select your records. So let's come over here, and let's say you wanted to sort by OEBs. Now, you need to be very, very careful, because if I just select this column and sort, you may end up just sorting that column, and you'll disassociate that volume with the unique identifiers. This is one of the main differences between a database and an Excel spreadsheet. There's basically no rules or no protection. You can corrupt your data. So you want to be very careful is to make sure you select all the records in your database so that everything moves together relatively. So we've selected all the records, and let's do a sort here. We'll do a custom sort, which is the one I mostly use, and we're going to first off make sure my data has headers as checked. So here I've selected it so it knows that it has a header, and we're going to sort by, let's go by the OEB, and we're going to go from largest to smallest. Say we want to know which is basically the most productive well in this database, and this is what's going to help us. So now we can see that the Moncrief well in Waltman Field is the most productive, and it has produced 599,426 barrels in the year 2000. It's also interesting to note that the first 13 wells that the most productive are from Waltman, and you can see more and more. And here you can see here the count is 4, and here you can see the count is 12. There's no other statistics down here because this is a text field. For the last part of this tutorial, let's talk a little bit about fill and series. Let's say I wanted to fill a number of cells with a value, and in this case we're going to fill it with 1. I could just put 1 in the cell, grab the little handle down in the lower right and drag it down, and it put in ones. Let's say I wanted to increment it by 1 and make it so it goes, make a count, 2, 3, and so forth. I could just highlight the cell so it includes the count and drag it down. Another way this could be done is you could just highlight those two cells and just right click in the lower right, and it will also count it that way. Let's say I wanted to do a count by 3, so I'm going to go 3, 6, and then you want it to go 9 and so forth. Highlight those two. I'll just double click here, and now it's counting by 3, so you can increment it that way. So there's another way to do this. Let's say I wanted to fill a count of 1,000 rows by 1 or by 3. So what you could do is highlight a cell, and let's put in here 1, and then under the home menu there is this little icon here for fill, and there's something called series, and you can see I'm going to do a column, linear growth. We're going to go step value, and we're going to stop at 1,000, and OK, and now I have 1,000 rows counting up. And you could increment that by different increments and so forth. This is real useful sometimes when you want to just create data.